Hi, everybody. Welcome to Quarantine. Today we have Mollie with us from Safe Harbors of the Finger Lakes. Thank you so much for joining us. So we always start our videos with our names, pronouns, and then a question. And this week, my question of the week is, what month of the year is your favorite and why? So for me, my name is Mitch. I use he, him, his pronouns. And my actual favorite month of the year is probably March because by then the snow is starting to melt and the flowers are starting to come up. And it's a very hopeful, cheery month. So I like it.
That's a great one. My name is Amy. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And my favorite month of the year is probably August because it's my birth month, but it's also my partner's birth month and one of my best friend's birth month. So August is a really exciting time. And also it's nice and warm and sunny outside. I went to Arizona to visit my dearest friend in August. So there's a lot of really good memories that I have attached to August.
Yeah. My name's Molly. I use she, her pronouns. And my favorite month of the year, it's funny that you said March, that's my birthday, but it's not my favorite month at all. I really like November because it's sort of that time in the year where things slow down a bit. October is all about pumpkins and all those things, but November, you still get really beautiful colors. You can go outside still. You can get some warm days where you can, I like to hike and be outdoors. And then also it's sort of the kickoff to the end of the year. So I feel like once Thanksgiving hits, everything moves super fast and the year is just about over. So November is kind of like the last deep breath, I feel like, for me before the end of the year.
That's so funny you say that because November is my birthday month. But I always say that it's not my favorite because it's the prelude to winter.
That's why I like August. It's just like right in the middle of the year and it's so warm, but it's not necessarily too warm depending on where you live. And I don't like being cold. So as soon as Halloween hits, I'm like, all right, I'm done for the year. I'm good. We can move on.
Time to hibernate. Yep, absolutely. Yep. So Molly, could you tell us a little bit about Safe Harbors and what you do there?
Yeah, so Safe Harbors of the Finger Lakes is a free and confidential service in Yates, Seneca, and Ontario County. We provide services to anyone who's experienced interpersonal violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and exploitation as well. And so my main job, I'm a youth advocate for one. So I work with youth who have experienced any of those things or who may be at risk of experiencing those things. And I also do a lot of education around human trafficking and exploitation, both in schools, on individual basis, and sort of with my clients. And we'll talk more about sort of what that looks like as we go.
That's great. What a great resource to have too. So for a lot of LGBTQ youth that we work with, especially in rural settings, online relationships are something that we've seen as being more attractive, especially given the fact that we're during COVID times right now. They're also sometimes the only way that people can meet other queer people or have trans-friendly dates. So what would you recommend when you're working with youth and they're talking about having online relationships or, thinking about doing something like that? What would you recommend to help keep them safe in online relationships?
For me, I think the big thing to talk about and to come up with before you seek any relationship, really, whether it's online, in person, in a group setting as well, is to sort of kind of think about what you want out of it. So I really encourage youth and adults, everyone that I work with, to sort of put out what they're looking for, what they want out of a partner, and maybe, acknowledging some red flags for them of what might mean, hey, this person's not going to work out. Because when we are seeking online relationships, there are other challenges that aren't necessarily as a parent, but still are present when we're in person. And I think some of the big ones are just being able to acknowledge when something's maybe moving really fast, when someone knows things about you or tells you things that just seem too good to be true. There are a lot of people, as we know, that are online pretending to be people that they're not. And so really being able to know that this person is real, whether that means, people talk about when they're on a dating app or they're talking to someone, video chatting, just like briefly to sort of acknowledge, okay, this is actually the person I'm talking to. Because people can post pictures of someone else. They can get a whole, I mean, nowadays you can get a whole collage of pictures of one person and it still isn't the person you're talking to. So that's a big kind of hurdle you have to overcome. And then the other parts is just those kind of boundaries of how far am I going to go with things? How quickly do I want this to move? Or how quickly should this move maybe, and being able to sort of set those parameters for yourself beforehand, because once you're in it, it's really hard to pump the brakes or to say, oh wait, maybe this person isn't who I thought they were, but I really like them now. So I'm kind of in a weird place where I don't really maybe want to know the truth. And so being able to sort of set up that standard of what you're looking for, acknowledging and making sure that it's really the person you are talking to and the person you're seeing, whether it's pictures or whatever else, and really deciding what are you willing to share about yourself, and how will that go, you know?
Absolutely. So like we just talked about in your response to the last question, do you also find in your work that you sometimes end up spending time with people that do have inappropriate boundaries, and that may normalize unsafe behaviors as just being part of the LGBTQ experience when they're just trying to find someone to talk to, someone who will accept them?
Yeah, so something that I love to talk about with youth, because we all have them, our vulnerabilities. And so what makes us able to be sort of taken advantage of or potentially manipulated? And when we're young and when we're seeking connection, we are really vulnerable because we're putting ourselves out there. We're asking someone to accept us for who we are. And sometimes what they make seem like, oh, well, if I'm accepting you, then you should accept me for who I am, and who they are may not be someone that you find that you want to accept, because there's things about them. They maybe have unhealthy characteristics, like maybe they're encouraging you to hang out with them, drink and smoke, do things that you maybe haven't done or you want to do, but they're a lot older than you. And so large age gaps are something that I talk a lot about, because they're kind of in a middle ground. Just because there's an age gap between two people doesn't necessarily mean they can't be friends or have a connection, but it does mean that there has to be some boundaries in that relationship that are pretty set in stone. If someone is over the age of 18, 21 especially, and someone is under the age of 18, what you do together, it has to be different than what you do with someone who's maybe 18 or, closer in age. And I think that that's an issue that I've seen from clients, is that they find an older person who sort of invites them in, welcomes them, accepts them for who they are, and then sort of introduces things like, oh, do you want to come to my house? We're going to have a party tonight. We're going to smoke, we're going to drink. It's going to be a really good time. And that's a huge red flag, because if someone is an adult, especially like over the age of 21 adult, them doing that, inviting you in to do those things with them, one indicates to me that they may be wanting to take advantage of you, and getting you get high or drunk is a way to do that. And the second is that this person is breaking the law, and they're breaking quite a few laws if they're having you at their house doing that. And why are they putting themselves at risk like that to have you there? Because I've seen cases where someone kind of welcomes all these young people in and creates an environment where it's cool to smoke and drink and do all these things. And then they're exploiting some people on the side. They're waiting till someone is maybe really drunk or under the influence, and suggesting for them to take their clothes off, or suggesting for them to do things that they did not come there to do. And so that's something that, a large age gap by itself is a red flag. It's not necessarily unhealthy right off the bat, but when there's these added components of drugs, substances, or sex, then it's really starting to get into a slippery slope of, what is this relationship really about? Is it about welcoming you and accepting you for who you are? Or is it about, you're young and I can take advantage of you, and I can mold you kind of into what I want as an adult? And then that's really, it's hard to get out of once you're in it.
Yeah, it sounds like something, and we're going to talk about this more a little bit later, but it's certainly a form of grooming, is what that rings to me. And I just wanted to touch on, so this is something brand new that I am just hearing about myself, but what you were saying about the age gap, there's a very popular song right now called Driver's License that has like blown up on TikTok because it's very sad and everybody wants to be sad and have a song to like lie on the floor and be sad too. Like I certainly was that kid as a teenager too. But the actual, have you heard it, Amy?
Yeah, it's atrocious.
Yeah. So the girl who wrote the song, she wrote the song because she was inspired because when she was 15, she fell in love with an 18-year-old and wanted to be with him. And he set the healthy boundary of, you know, this age gap doesn't work for me. I'm not going to do this. And they were celebrities. They were working on a TV show. And so, you know, there are all kinds of things in the media that there are different boundaries, but this guy really did the right thing and said, no, we're not going to do this. And she's now written this really sad song, which was an important part of her healing, I'm sure, because I'm sure she was sad. And of course, that's hard. But now, in popular media, it's blown up and people are kind of attacking this guy for how could he break her heart when what he really did was establish a healthy boundary. And so I was just finding out about the backstory of that song, and I know it's super popular. And so talking about why we set those boundaries and talking about that situation kind of I hope will demystify this like added layer of acceptance we have for these unhealthy behaviors when they come from celebrities.
Yeah, and so in saying it's atrocious, I want to clarify, it's atrocious that this man is being attacked when like it's rare at this point when we're online and in relationships to see people setting boundaries. And I know you see it all the time, and it's something that we see all the time too, is there's a lack of community. There's a lack of people teaching these proper boundaries. There's a lack of people willing to enact these proper boundaries because of whatever, you know, whatever need for control comes up, or, you know, whatever is going on the sidelines. And it's becoming sort of a target on your back if you're behaving properly. And that's a trend that we've seen. I've seen it on TikTok a few times too. And it's, you know, we're normalizing these situations because it's mysterious and it's cool, and you want to be the younger person who's been picked out by this older person, and we're not talking about what that means deeper. And so, you know, I think we see a role in community being helpful when we can develop this properly. But what do you sort of see as the role for community and community acceptance and opportunities that are age appropriate and have safe involvement with communities? Do you see that sort of playing a role in lowering risks and teaching boundaries?
I definitely think that there is a ton of benefit to finding a community of people, finding people that you can talk to. And one of my big things, which I think is difficult for youth who don't feel like there's people in their community who understand them, is finding at least one person in real life that's your age that you do trust. Because you can have community online, you can have potential online relationships, but you need one person to bounce those ideas off of, to say, okay, so they're saying this, like, what do I do now? Or what do you think about them saying I should do this? And I think people, it's harder to find that. But even if it's one person and maybe they don't have everything in common with you, but you trust them, then that might be enough that you can kind of at least touch base with someone else. Because I think what happens sometimes is we get into these bigger groups of people, we sort of go with the status quo. And as you've kind of mentioned, sometimes it's not the most healthy. They're not maybe setting boundaries, or they might not have them and they're opposing them if you do try to set them. And so finding, you know, that one person that you can trust to sort of just discuss what's happening. And maybe you do find a really great group where people are really, I know that there are a lot of really good groups out there that talk a lot about consent and a lot about feeling, you know, confident and comfortable asking and giving consent. And those are groups that I feel are far few and in between. And I think that that's why you really just need a point person that you can go to and say, what do you think? And sometimes in my work, that's my job. You know, I have clients who will text me and be like, okay, so this happened. What do you think? Like, what do you think? I don't know how I feel. And usually all I'm doing is just asking them questions like, well, what do you want to say? What do you want to do? And having someone who can just kind of tease what a group or someone else may want from you can be really influential. And sometimes we think community has to be a bunch of people, but sometimes it's one person.
I love that idea of giving them the power back to be like, I'm not going to make this decision for you. I need to hear what works for you. Because I think a lot of times what happens is we see this crisis happening and we're like, oh my gosh, put a branch in the wheel right now and this pattern. But then, we're not necessarily leaving that room for self-advocacy. So I really love that that's how you turn that back on them and say, okay, I hear your concern. What do you want to do? Because they're either going to come up with a great idea or they're going to give you a sort of scaffolding of an idea and you can help fluff that out. So I love that.
Yeah. And absolutely, the idea of community sometimes meaning just that one safe person, like what a sigh of relief that sounds so much more obtainable. And, I think that's something that has been true. We cite the statistic all the time that for LGBT youth, having one supportive person in their life decreases their risk of harmful behaviors by up to 40%. According to the research of the Trevor Project. And so certainly that peer support as well absolutely is a priority. So when working with youth, and like specifically looking at it through the human trafficking prevention lens, what are some of the high-risk activities and red flags that adults and family members and service providers can be looking out for?
The number one red flag and concern that the number one way you can be at risk is by running away. Being displaced from your home by whatever means, however it happens, that is the easiest way for an exploiter or trafficker to pick you off. I had a client who was walking up and down the street. She had run away. She didn't know where to go. And someone just approached her and was like, oh, you can come stay with me. Like, I'll help you out. Let you use my phone, whatever you need to do. And then she was there for months and didn't have a way out. And so running away is one of the number one red flags. And we used to do it. Most of us have tried, attempted to run away at least once in our lives, if not more. And so just acknowledging that it puts people at risk. And if you are doing that, what is the safest way to make sure that you're not being exploited? When I first started this job as the human trafficking specialist, I remember I was talking to my dad and he had run away a ton in his youth. And I told him how trafficking includes someone saying, oh, you can stay here, but you also have to have sex with me or you have to have sex with my friends. And he said that he was approached like that a lot as a youth. And we also like to think this only really happens to girls. And there's a lot of statistics on females that have this happen, and that's just not accurate. Any youth that runs away is put at risk because you want a place to stay, and sometimes a roof over your head means you might be willing to do other things that you would not normally do. So that's a big one. Another is having been abused or neglected during childhood, or even sexually abused during childhood. It is a red flag later on because traffickers will use that to their advantage. So they'll say, well, you already had these things happen to you. I'm going to take care of you. We're in a relationship and this is a mutual exchange. We're in this together. So you're maybe sleeping with these people and I'm taking the money, but it's for both of us. And that can be easily done when they're saying and they're comparing someone's past, which is really sad because it's basically saying the trauma that you've already experienced, this isn't as bad as that, so you're good. You'll be able to handle this. And it's not fair, and it really makes things harder later on. Also, some other red flags are just sort of the riskier behaviors. And I like to talk about these because as young people, we all kind of engage in our own level of risky or sexual behavior. And The examples that I like to give, concrete example of how someone can use that to their advantage, is, someone takes a picture of you, or you send a picture, or someone records an intimate moment that you had with them, and then that's their leverage. So, if you don't do this with me, then I'm going to share this video with everyone. If you don't stay with me in this relationship, then I'm going to expose that you sent me these pictures and I'm going to post them publicly. And that's extortion, and it's illegal, but so many people are so scared by the threat that they won't get help for it. And that is a way for someone to continue to exploit someone, because it works one time and they keep doing that. And I found locally that that's really common for young people and for adults too. It happens to adults too. So those are things to sort of consider and think about. And I mean, we kind of touched on grooming already, but I like to also just bring up, there's a lot of red flags for traffickers. And so acknowledging if someone is being acting like things are way too good to be true, they're promising things that they shouldn't, that you feel like they shouldn't be, or that they are not going to be able to fulfill. They have a lot of nice things that don't make sense for what their job might be. And so also looking at the red flags of the people who are exploiting, if someone's in their mid 30s and they're wanting to hang out with 16-year-olds, that is a concern. And it's not to be mean and say that a 16-year-old isn't really cool and fun to talk to, but it's that there's usually ulterior motives to those conversations.
Yeah.
So you actually touched on what we wanted to talk about next was grooming. So, it's sort of a buzzword. We hear it a lot. It gets brought up quite frequently. But what exactly would you say grooming means, and what does it look like, especially from the outside?
Yeah. Grooming is preparing someone to be able to manipulate or control them. So preparing someone really, when it comes to that, is I always like to call it like buttering someone up, making them feel a connection to you, making them trust you, getting them to really feel like you are their person in one way or another, whether that's sometimes that's gifts, giving someone new things, taking someone to get their nails done. I've had it where it was taking someone to Walmart and then buying them fast food and buying them pizza and getting a hotel room for them and their friends, things like that. It doesn't always have to be really elaborate. It can just be like they're consistent, they're checking in. And sometimes online, that's how it starts, is that person's just always there. They're always available to talk to you. They tell you, your parents don't understand you. They don't get you. And I really do. I understand where you're coming from. I had the same things happen to me when I was your age. And so they're building a rapport and a relationship with you in order to take what they learn about you and use it to get you to do what they want. So, it starts off very, very fun and nice, and it's maybe exactly what you're looking for. And then it quickly becomes, okay, so we're really close now. Would you be willing to send me a picture of this? Or, would you like to maybe meet in person, when that was not something that originally that person was going to consider? They've gotten to a point where they really trust this person, so they think about it. Sometimes traffickers are even pretty obvious about what they're doing, but they make it seem like it's very luxurious and very a life that you want. Like, look at how beautiful these pictures of these people are. Like, we can take the same pictures of you and we can make money off them. So sometimes it becomes like these asks or these things are sort of prefaced in the beginning, little sprinkles of like what might happen later, but then all of a sudden it's kind of like, okay, now we're good friends, we trust each other, and this is what this relationship is now. But you may be so focused on how nice the person was to you that you don't even see that now they're changing their tune and they're asking you for things that you're not comfortable with.
It sounds like that sort of honeymoon period you get at the beginning of relationships where everything's so good. And then by the time you realize things aren't great, you're sort of stuck. So that's really interesting to hear you talk about it that way, because that's also something that we see often in domestic violence situations. So it's really interesting to see the way patterns sort of intersect when we're talking about dangerous and toxic relationships. So when you've been working with people you've seen being groomed, or you've helped get out of these situations, have you noticed grooming maybe take on a different look when we're working directly with like the LGBTQ or like same sex or queer trafficking situations with adults or youth?
I think the big push is I understand you and I've been through what you've been through, and no one else that you have in your life maybe has gone through what you have. And sometimes that's not even the truth. That person very well may not have experienced what they're saying that they have to get in and to sort of be in that relationship with someone, but they're using knowledge about the LGBTQ community to say, okay, so I had the same thing happen to me, and oh, I really also love this type of thing. And a lot of that is people don't always realize how much information they share when they share information. I always tell people, you know, if you have a logo on a shirt, that's your school, they can figure out where you go to school. They can see if you're in the marching band, if you're in a sport. They can look at and figure out a lot about you by a couple pictures. They can look at who your friends are and what they post. They can look at where you live and realize, oh, wow, this person lives in a really rural area and the people there are terrible. Like they are sharing all sorts of, you know, racist, sexist, all sorts of things. And I'm gonna use that to my advantage. And I'm gonna show them that I support and understand them. And clearly the people around them don't. So sometimes it's like pulling. I think a lot of isolation happens too, where they're pulling the person away from their community. And while there might be one or two people there that actually really could understand or could be supportive, this trafficker, this exploiter is pulling that person away from them and saying they don't really understand you. Only I can understand you. So it's a lot of like the isolation and using the vulnerabilities that someone has to make them think like this is the only person that gets me.
Absolutely. There's like that added layer too. We talk about with domestic violence, the power and control wheel. And when I'm talking about power and control in LGBTQ relationships, I tend to refer to it as the power and control tire, because there's that added layer of historical bias and societal stereotypes and things like that, and the homophobia, the transphobia, the biphobia. And so for someone who isn't out, but comes out to a person that they're talking to and is sharing these experiences, that identity becomes leverage then, that they oftentimes will say, oh, now that I know this about you, if you don't do XYZ, I'm going to tell everybody and nobody's going to understand you because of where, you know, they are geographically. So
yeah, the threat of outing is huge. And it also can be very particular. Like if you don't do what I'm saying, or you don't continue to talk with me, I'll send your parents this screenshot of you saying that you're this, or I'll post it on your school website, or I'll share it on Instagram and make it public. And I've seen people actually do that, to post something publicly like on Instagram and add all the people from their school. And that's part of that. The knowledge that they may have of you is more than you think they have of you. And they're able to leverage and say, I know you have a sister, I know you have a brother, I'm going to tell them, you know, people that you really may not be ready to tell yet.
Something else I've noticed too is, you know how like on Facebook there'll be like your first and last initial and your birth year and the street you grew up on is your this name. I've seen a lot of people say like those charts are really good ways of like very innocuously getting information, because if you say, oh, because my name is Amy, my first initial is an A and I was born in this year, so I would be this of this, you know, those super like simple charts, like, oh, this is a really funny name, this is my elf name. But that's actually a way that people can be like, oh, okay, so she grew up on this street and she was born in this year, and right now her Facebook says she's living in this town, so my guess is she was born in lived on this street in this town. And it's a really easy way for predators to get that information. Have you seen things like that happen too?
Yeah, I've had cases where people are just like, well, they knew this about me. I'm trying to remember the one specific, but there's been a couple where they're like, well, they knew. So I thought it was someone I knew. I genuinely thought that this was a boy from another school that was like nearby. And we started talking, and it was not that person. And I think that's a way, especially with young people, a predator might say, oh, I'm so-and-so. I go to, Penn Yan school, and you believe it because they have information about you that you only think someone who went to Penn Yan would have, when in reality it's like a 40-year-old that lives in California. But yeah, exactly. I mean, the amount of information that's shared, a lot of people, young people, don't know that pictures carry data with them, and that data can include your GPS location of where you took the photo, what kind of a device you use to take the photo, so they can figure out, oh, you have this iPhone or that. A lot of information can be pulled off of a picture that you send, and you don't even realize. And it only takes, a quick online upload the photo, and you can pull all that data and get that information.
Yeah. I think we're all continuing to learn that, certainly our generation too. Like, for example, Snapchat maps, having that enabled, like, it's just been made clear to us that in an evacuation situation, that tells you where the people have evacuated to, and that's information that can be accessed. So it's certainly important to like think about social media safety and checking your settings. And similar to that vein, we talked about this a little bit before we started the recording, but I wanted to ask you specifically about OnlyFans. So while it can be something that people use with a great deal of control and agency and success as a means of financial income, and there are positives to that, what are your thoughts on it through the human trafficking lens? And do you think that adults are able to use that platform safely?
So I think obviously OnlyFans is designed for adults. In order to create an account, you have to take a picture of yourself holding your license and then it has to be approved. So they have to confirm that it's the person holding the license. You also have to have a routing and account number to a bank, which is different than a lot of these other apps that traffickers have used in the past, such as dating apps, Snapchat, things like that, where they can pull it, or you can give someone a Cash App number and you can make 100 Cash Apps for one person. So there are some benefits to OnlyFans being a bit safer. But what was found, in a lot of research on sort of the move to OnlyFans and the move to online advertising and also just like online sales, was that when COVID started, a ton of traffickers had their victims or the people that were being trafficked make accounts. So it doesn't mean that everyone on there is on there because they want to be on there. But there are a lot of ways that if someone was being trafficked on OnlyFans, that they could potentially report that and have concrete evidence of what was going on because of the routing numbers, because of things like that. And OnlyFans has a messaging feature where if you're talking about meeting in person, it will block the user. So it tries to really sway any using it for solicitation. I think it really does a decent job of that. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But people can't just post, an ad and advertise in-person services, which doesn't mean that they're not being exploited, because people can be exploited on webcams and things like that as well. So I do think that for adults who are choosing to make an account, it can be a really safe place, but you also have to have your boundaries set ahead of time. You have to decide, what am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? Because there's a lot of people who use online platforms like that because they have certain fetishes or they have certain things that they're into, and they don't necessarily want to be exposed for those things. So they're using an online platform to sort of mask themselves and then be able to get what they want, which means that people may ask someone on there for things that they aren't willing to do or give, and they may offer a lot of money that might be hard to resist. So people are more tempted to do things that they wouldn't normally or wouldn't want to do. And that's where, having those boundaries ahead of time, saying, okay, here, let me think about this before I make the account. What will I do? What won't I do? Would I meet with someone? And that's something too that people have to consider for themselves if that's their choice. Where trafficking and exploitation come in is if someone else is saying, okay, you're going to do this. You're going to take that picture with your ID. You're going to put your account information on there. You're going to post these types of content, or that someone can use it and then make content with someone else and post it. And because OnlyFans is very confidential in the sense of like, you can't go on there and just search like whatever you want type of thing. You have to find the links to certain people's subscriptions. You have to subscribe. You have to put a bank account on there, which a lot of people are like, aren't going to do if they're going to do something illegal. But there's definitely like that potential that someone could kind of force someone into that. And so considering how that may look and what that might do is important, because especially when COVID started, a lot of exploitation moved to online because people couldn't just meet up, and people wouldn't meet up. There was even statistics that said, buyers of sex went down during COVID because they were at home with their families and they didn't have an excuse to not be home because they couldn't say they were going to work. Because they
right.
So for someone who we know is confirmed to be, in this trafficking situation, or someone who we might think is potentially in a trafficking situation, the Finger Lakes is a very rural area. So what are the steps that they can take to get help getting out of this pattern or this situation?
I think one of the biggest things, a lot of people don't acknowledge that they're a victim of trafficking, and they may think, okay, I'm in a really unhealthy relationship. And that's okay. If that's the means that they decide to get help through, they say, I'm in a domestic violence relationship. This person is making me have sex with people for money. They're making me have sex with the landlord to pay the rent. And I don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to because of this relationship. Then they can get services for domestic violence. I think that a lot of providers get nervous about trafficking. But really it's advocating and helping someone just the same as we would help, someone along these other things, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault. The biggest difference is the reporting process. And I think a lot of people don't understand that local law enforcement generally does not necessarily know how to handle trafficking cases. They might charge someone with child sexual abuse, when there is trafficking. So I always kind of open things up. Everything, like all the services for me, are free and confidential. If someone's 13 or older, they do not have to have parental consent to meet with me, to talk with me about things. So I think that that's a good start, is just talking to someone about what's going on. And then service-wise, it's always up to the client, whether they want to pursue criminal charges, whether they want to make an anonymous tip line. I've done that with people before. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has an online anonymous tip line where you can give information about a situation. You can give information like about a house. I had someone who had briefly stayed at a home where there were other people who were being trafficked, and they were scared because they didn't really want to go to law enforcement and make a report because they weren't sure what would happen if law enforcement showed up there. But they were willing to do an anonymous tip line, and those go to Homeland Security. So they're handled by completely different groups of people. And I think that that's important for people to know, that they don't necessarily have to go to local law enforcement. There are other resources if they do want to report something. And if they don't, then there's other realms of ensuring that they feel safe and that they feel comfortable in whatever situation that they, may find themselves, and getting services for whatever you want. So sometimes my clients, they don't necessarily want me to help them with a trafficking right away, but they maybe need help advocating with their probation officer. So maybe I bring them to probation, I hang out with them at their appointment, and then I bring them back and we talk, we get coffee, we do stuff just kind of to talk, and they have a person that if something happens and they do really need to get out right away, we can make a plan together. It just really is about meeting people where they're at and whatever they may need help with, regardless of if they want to acknowledge that they're being exploited or not. They don't have to get services. So, just meeting people if they want counseling, making sure that they have access, if they need transportation, making sure they have transportation, whatever it is.
So those are fantastic tips. And so there are a lot of different agencies that provide this assistance of some type of advocacy, but you guys are really sort of leading the charge here in working with sex trafficking and human trafficking. So as an agency center that provides advocacy services but doesn't necessarily specifically work with trafficking situations, how can we as the LGBTQ program and as an overall agency help prevent trafficking and assist trafficking survivors?
I think talking about boundaries and healthy relationships is the best way to get information out there, because until someone realizes that the situation that they're in is not healthy, it is not normal, no matter where they come from or what community they're a part of, it doesn't matter. If you're a lesbian, if you're gay, if you're in any type of relationship, these are things that are just unhealthy. And I think that there's been so much stereotypes and things put out there that make people think that their relationship that may be unhealthy is not unhealthy, or that it's normal, or that, that's just how it is in this community, and it's not. So I think the biggest thing is really just discussing boundaries, discussing healthy relationships, and being able to kind of talk about red flags. So with clients, some of the biggest successes I found is doing journaling, where we both kind of independently write down lists of like, what is my dream partner? What is my dream relationship? What would it look like? What am I willing to work with? What am I not willing to work with? Because then when someone comes along and tries to push those boundaries and exploit, you already have your own thoughts about it. And it doesn't mean someone else is coming in and saying, your relationship's really unhealthy. It means you're able to reflect and say, oh, wow, this is not where I want to be. This is not who I want to be with. So I think that's a huge way. And then also just collaboration. So maybe someone's meeting with Amy and they really, really enjoy working with her, and they don't really want to work with anyone else because they trust you and that's how they feel. Then what I would do is I wouldn't come in and say, okay, well, I'll just meet with you all and we'll do this. I would provide you with resources of ways that you can go about things. If that person wanted to report something, how to do it. And I think that there's a lot of power in just collaborating with other people and not necessarily always making the referral. Sometimes it's good to make a referral. If that person really needs like transportation, really needs other services that an agency can provide, of course. But if someone's already has that connection, use that connection and be a resource. And just, we have to educate ourselves as providers of how we can be better at helping people so that they don't necessarily have to move around and tell someone else their story if they don't need to.
Absolutely. So that's something that we have maintained as a team. Our team motto back in the day was, I don't know, but I will find out, because rather than bounce people around, we would try to educate ourselves and one another. So definitely like learning more and talking with you has been fantastic to help us further kind of think about these red flags and what this might look like. And I really especially appreciate your knowledge about OnlyFans and knowing that that's a more secure platform. Like, I feel so much more reassured about my clients who do utilize that platform. So our last question that we have for you, Mollie, is I know you and I have talked a little bit ourselves about Love 146's #NotANumber program. Could you tell us a bit about that and then how you've been offering it during COVID-19?
Yeah, so the full curriculum is 5 days And we can do it sort of with any group of people. And we've done it in a lot of different ways. We've done it with like groups of youth in foster care, where we just meet once a week and we kind of go over the material. We do it in schools where it's like 5 days in a row, and kind of get through all of the material. And the reason why it's 5 days, and I think that's why it's good, is because it talks about kind of all the little things and all the sort of red flags that we've talked about here. There's a day about healthy relationships. There's a day about gender stereotypes and how people utilize those. And it's really interesting because when I do these activities with youth, a lot of them haven't really thought about how gender stereotypes play a role in exploitation and vulnerabilities, and how people can exploit or take advantage. We also talk about, and we do it's a lot of activities. So it's a lot of like, we're going to read through this online conversation between these two people. And when we think something's weird, we're going to raise a red flag and say, whoa, this is not normal. And it opens dialogue. It really creates conversation. It's a lot of scenarios. So you get real life, real situations that have happened to youth and how they were trafficked and what circumstances led to them being exploited, which I think if you go on Love 146, they have a lot of good information about like how this happens. They work internationally, so they do a lot of different things that aren't as common in the US, but they also do home-based, like US-based advocacy with youth. So they have their own experiences. But with COVID, obviously 5 days is a big commitment. And most people are not meeting in groups weekly anymore in person. And most of it is group-based work. So you're working with your peers, you're working in small groups and talking about scenarios and situations. And we can do that via Zoom somewhat. We can do some of it, but we've also started doing like a 1 day sort of collaboration of like a lot of the different materials that are our favorites. I always really like to do a certain activity, so I just include them in a 1 day sort of training. And I also do it on an individual basis. So I'll meet with people, and especially youth who are kind of having situations happen and or maybe are at risk of having someone exploit or traffic them, and we sort of talk through a lot of the examples and what they look like, because I think people get a false image in their head of what trafficking is. They think it's these big elaborate schemes. They think of, you know, Jeffrey Epstein, and they think of these like different scenarios that don't necessarily include the day-to-day trafficking that we see in suburban and rural areas, which is, you know, exchanges, survival sex is a form of trafficking in a lot of ways. And we don't talk about it enough. So it gives you real life examples of what trafficking actually can look like and how it has worked, how it's played out in people's lives, which is important because peers can traffic peers, you know, family members can be involved, and we really have to widen our scope of what we consider trafficking or exploitation in order to be able to prevent and to acknowledge when it's happening to us.
That's fantastic information to have. This is, you know, and like you said, people think about the big name situations, but it really is something that happens in our own backyard all the time. And, you know, it's great to catch it on the levels that we do catch it, but it's so crucial that we know how to look for it so that it doesn't rise to those levels where it gets caught and becomes a national thing. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about what this looks like, because it is sort of this silent issue that hovers over us, and people who are in the human services community know that it exists, but it's really hard getting this information and knowledge out there. So I guess my final question for you would just be, what's the fastest, easiest way to get into contact with your services if something were to come up?
So we have a 24-hour hotline. Our hotline number is 800-247-7273. That is a quick way to just say, hey, I'm calling. I'd like to speak to Mollie. And that is really, you can call at any time, night or weekend. If it's a night or weekend and I'm not on call, then I'll probably call you the first, you know, when I first see the call or the email. And then I have a work phone too that can be, you can text, you can message, our Instagram, our Facebook. If it's directed toward me, it'll come to me and I'll respond to whoever it is as fast as I can, which usually is within a day. So, acknowledging that it could be just a question, it could be a peer, doesn't necessarily have to be, that this is happening. It could just be that you want to talk more about it, or learn more, or you have a friend that you're worried about and you want to know what you can do to support them. So yeah, the hotline is a great resource. And then also eventually, if you do call the hotline, you'll get my cell phone number, and that's a little more accessible.
Thank you so much, Mollie. And we'll drop that information below in the description for the video, like we always do. But again, thank you so much for your time and for educating us on this and helping us use our platform to continue this conversation on a larger level.
Yeah, thank you both for having me here. I was really looking forward to this, to be able to talk a little bit more, and I always learn a ton from both of you, and I've been watching your videos, so it's great to be on here with you both.
Thanks, Mollie.
Thanks, Mollie.